Hey there. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that really affects a lot of people, but maybe doesn't always get talked about enough. What happens when, two people from pretty different class backgrounds decide to build a life together? We're diving into cross-class marriages.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area and really complex. We've been going through this pile of research, articles, notes, trying to understand these relationships, the unique dynamics, the challenges, definitely, but also, how couples make it work, how they thrive.
Right. And our mission here, like always, is to give you the shortcut. We've done the reading, we've pulled out the key insights, the real takeaways from all these sources, so you can get up to speed fast on what makes these relationships tick.
And you'll see it's so much more than just current income or education levels. These sources really stress that. It's about these really deep-seated ways of seeing the world, interacting with it, ways you learn growing up. It's actually quite profound how much that past stays with you. Okay, so let's break that down. When we say cross-class marriage, is it just about like how much money someone earns right now?
No, the research is pretty clear. It's more complicated. It's not just your achieved status, your job, your degree, that kind of thing. It crucially includes your social origins, your family background, what sociologists call your ascribed status. And the really interesting dynamics happen where those two things intersect.
So it's less about where you are today necessarily and more about where you started, the foundation.
That's a huge part of it, yes.
Yeah.
And you sometimes see this idea of status exchange come up and how these partnerships form. It's where maybe consciously, maybe not, partners kind of balance things out. Someone from, say, a more working class background, but with a high level of education, might partner with someone from a more privileged background who maybe doesn't have that same academic credential.
Okay. Like that old saying, marrying the boss's daughter. Is that sort of related?
That narrative definitely captures a piece of it, yeah. It points to this complex negotiation of different attributes when people choose partners.
Yeah.
And sociologically, it's important because while most people tend to marry someone similar homogamy, they call it these cross-class unions, are a really key pathway for social mobility. A lot of the research focuses on highly educated adults who are navigating this blend of different family origins.
What really stood out to me from the sources was just how powerful that class of origin is, how much it sticks. Even if, say, both partners become doctors or lawyers, their childhoods, their backgrounds, it's like this invisible baggage they carry.
That is absolutely one of the core takeaways. There's a researcher, Jessie Schreiber, who's cited a lot here. She puts it brilliantly. Merged lives do not lead to merged ideas about how to lead those lives.
Oh, yeah, that really hits home. And that connects to the concept of habitus, right? These like deep-seated values, norms, even gut feelings you absorb from your family's resources and way of life growing up.
Exactly, that's the habitus. It's kind of like the default programming installed in childhood. It shapes your assumptions, your comfort zones, how you instinctively react to things, especially uncertainty.
And understanding that seems crucial.
Totally critical. Because if you don't see this power of the past, as the sources call it, it's so easy to misinterpret these really ingrained class-based differences. You might see your partner's way of doing things as a personality flaw. They're lazy or disorganized, or maybe they just don't care enough.
Instead of seeing it as simply a different learned cultural way of operating.
Precisely. And that misinterpretation can cause so much unnecessary pain and conflict.
Okay, so it's not about flaws. It's about navigating different cultural landscapes inherited from childhood.
Exactly. And the sources, often drawing on Strybe's work again, point to two sort of broad class-linked philosophies or approaches to life that frequently clash.
The managerial and the laissez-faire approaches.
You got it. The managerial approach is often associated with middle-class or white-collar upbringings. It's characterized by this desire to, well, manage life, organize, plan ahead, monitor things, oversee situations. It tends to come from environments where you had more access to resources, felt a greater sense of control, and planning for the future was emphasized.
Okay, makes sense. And the laissez-faire approach.
That's more commonly linked to working class or blue-collar roots. It's more about going with the flow, living in the moment, adapting to circumstances as they arise. It's not about being passive, though. It's often a really smart, adaptive strategy that develops in environments with maybe less predictability, less direct control, where flexibility was key.
Wow. I can immediately see how those two basic orientations could cause friction, like daily.
Well, absolutely. They can
Or
clash all over the place. Think about chores. One person wants a schedule, a system. The other does things organically when they see they need doing.
or planning a vacation.
Huge potential flashpoint. One person might want a detailed itinerary, mapping out every hour. The other wants to just hit the road and see what happens. Complete opposite approaches.
And what about just talking to each other? Communication styles.
Big differences can show up there too. How direct are you? How much needs to be explicitly stated versus implied? How do you express emotions? Is it more measured, maybe kept internal, or more spontaneous, maybe louder, more direct? These often have roots in class-based communication norms.
Even how you spend your free time.
Yes, that comes up too. Is leisure time seen as an opportunity for self-improvement, learning a skill, enrichment activities? Or is it purely for unstructured relaxation, just chilling out, decompressing? One partner might want to take a class, the other just wants to veg out. Both valid, but different.
And the real kicker, according to the sources, is that these class differences are often invisible to us. Your own way, your cultural capital just feels normal.
Right. Exactly. It feels like the default, the right way.
Yeah.
So when conflicts arise, you don't automatically think, this is a class culture clash.
Yeah.
Instead, you personalize it. You think, my partner is so disorganized, or they're too rigid, or they just don't get it.
That misattribution seems like the core problem, thinking it's about the person, not the background.
It's incredibly damaging. Reframing it, seeing it as navigating different but equally valid cultural strategies, that's really the first essential step toward empathy and finding solutions.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Money. The sources really flag this as a major, major point of conflict.
They absolutely do. Financial disagreements in cross-class couples are often described as more pervasive, definitely more problematic, and often harder to resolve than other types of conflict.
Where do those clashes typically show up most intensely?
Spending versus saving priorities is a big one. You might have one partner deeply focused on saving, maybe due to a background of scarcity or just a very strong future orientation. The other partner might prioritize present enjoyment or perhaps operate with an assumption of stability that feels foreign to the first partner.
And ideas about what's responsible.
Yeah, huge differences there. Strict budgeting might feel essential and responsible to one, but stifling and unnecessary to the other. Spontaneity might feel freeing or reckless, depending on your background. Long-term planning, attitudes toward debt, even how you define fairness in contributions, and that includes non-monetary things like housework or childcare. These are all potential battlegrounds.
And this isn't really just about the numbers on a bank statement, is it? It feels deeper.
Absolutely not. The sources really emphasize that these money fights are often proxies. They're stand-ins for much deeper value conflicts tied to your class upbringing. It's not just different financial habits. It's fundamentally different values shaped by, unequal financial backgrounds and experiences growing up. Money carries so much emotional weight, security, freedom, status, anxiety, shame. It's all tangled up in there, often from childhood messages.
So just making a budget isn't going to magically fix it.
Probably not on its own, no. You really have to dig deeper. You need to explore what money means emotionally to each of you, understand how your class background shaped that meaning, and then critically work together to create financial practices that align with your shared values as a couple, not just importing your old class scripts wholesale. Sometimes professional help, like financial therapy, can be really useful for uncovering those childhood money messages.
Parenting. That feels like another area where these background differences would really come to the surface.
Oh, definitely. It's often one of the most visible and potent areas. Your class background profoundly shapes your ideas about discipline, education, even how kids should spend their time.
This sounds like where Annette Lareau's research comes in, the concerted cultivation versus accomplishment of natural growth.
Exactly that. Concerted cultivation is typically the more middle-class model. It involves structuring kids' time with activities, lessons, focusing on actively developing their talents. Childhood is kind of seen as a project to be managed. Very linked to that managerial approach we talked about.
Right. Lots of scheduled activities.
Yep. Whereas accomplishment of natural growth, more common in working class families, emphasizes giving kids more autonomy, more unstructured time. Development is seen as happening more organically, through play, hanging out with family and neighbors.
But it's more than just soccer practice versus climbing trees, right? There's something deeper going on.
Much deeper. Parenting is fundamentally future-oriented. It's tied up with what the psychologist John Gottman calls our hidden dreams for our children. Our hopes for the kind of people they'll become, the lives they'll lead. And those dreams are heavily, heavily influenced by our own upbringing, our own class experiences and values. So disagreements about parenting can become this kind of symbolic battleground. Partners might be, often implicitly, advocating for the vision of a good life they inherited from their own class background.
Wow. So navigating that successfully means
What?
creating a whole new vision together.
Essentially, yes. You have to bring those hidden dreams out into the open, talk about why certain approaches feel important to you, and then collaborate consciously to build a unique family culture for raising your kids, one that maybe takes strengths from both backgrounds but is distinctly your own.
Okay, let's talk about the wider social world. Families, friends. That sounds like it could be incredibly tricky ground to navigate.
It really can be.
Mm.
Partners often come from social networks that are pretty separate, socioeconomically speaking. And those networks can have very different norms, different expectations about family involvement, communication, everything.
So where do the main friction points tend to arise there?
Well, differences in family traditions can be one. Communication styles with extended family. How much involvement is expected, weekly dinners versus holidays only. Even fundamental values can clash. And then there's the potential for judgment from in-laws, maybe friends. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's pretty overt. Comments about marrying up or marrying down.
That sounds incredibly stressful, feeling judged by your partner's family or friends.
It is. And it can put the partner in a really difficult position, feeling caught between their spouse and their family of origin. Those loyalty binds can be intense.
I can also imagine just feeling awkward or out of place in different social settings.
Absolutely. You go to your partner's family gathering or a work event with their colleagues, and the unwritten rules might feel completely foreign. Conversation topics, etiquette, jokes, cultural references. It's what some sources call cultural capital collisions. The things that make you feel comfortable and competent in your own world suddenly don't apply, and you feel like an outsider. There's often a lack of what sociologists call bridging social capital, those connections that naturally span different class groups.
So these social events aren't just casual get-togethers. They can feel quite loaded.
For cross-class couples, they often can, yeah. They can feel like situations where your background and your partner's choice are sort of under scrutiny. This can lead to feeling like an outsider, not just in that specific setting, but potentially chipping away at your sense of belonging within the marriage if it's not handled well.
So what helps? How do couples manage that?
The sources really emphasize needing a strong, united front. Clear communication between the partners beforehand is key, and ideally, the partner whose family or network it is takes the lead in running interference, setting boundaries, explaining things to their network. Building your own strong couple culture, your shared identity, also acts as a really important buffer against those external pressures.
And beyond the immediate social circles, there's also broader societal stuff, right? Stigma, stereotypes.
Yes, that's definitely another layer to navigate. Society, historically and even now, tends to favor homogamy, marrying someone similar. So cross-class couples can face external prejudice or assumptions, especially if the woman has a higher socioeconomic status or earns more. That can challenge traditional gender norms and attract more scrutiny.
What kind of assumptions?
Things like, oh, they must have married for money, or doubts about whether they're truly compatible long-term.
How does that external pressure impact the couple themselves?
It can lead to feeling constantly misunderstood, judged, like you always have to justify your relationship. It can make social interactions more stressful. And it can also lead to something called internalized classism, where one or both partners start absorbing negative stereotypes about their own class background or their partners. That can erode self-esteem, create feelings of shame, or conversely, superiority. The sources also note that children in these families often become aware of these societal biases quite early on.
And this probably gets even more complicated when other factors like race or ethnicity are involved.
Absolutely. Intersectionality is key here. Stigma and stereotypes related to class often intensify when combined with race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Navigating those overlapping identities requires even greater awareness and sensitivity.
Okay, one last area of challenge. Power dynamics within the relationship itself, especially when there's that socioeconomic difference.
Yeah, this can be really subtle, often unspoken, but it can definitely impact relationship satisfaction. When one partner has significantly more financial resources or maybe higher social status, they might unintentionally end up having more influence in decisions, even if both partners want equality.
How does that actually play out, like in arguments or discussions?
Well, the socioeconomic context can change how communication patterns are even interpreted.
Right.
For example, what might look like a classic demand-withdraw pattern, one person pushing, the other shutting down. In some couples with significant inequality, the withdrawal might actually be an adaptive strategy by the less powerful partner to avoid escalating conflict over something they feel they can't change anyway.
Interesting. So the same behavior can mean different things.
Exactly. And class itself shapes communication styles. Who feels more comfortable speaking up, how assertive you're expected to be. There can also be this sort of resource curse or deficit perception, where the communication style or cultural capital associated with the higher SES background might just be seen as more legitimate, more effective, potentially devaluing the lower SES partner's style without anyone meaning to.
So couples need to actively examine whose way of communicating is being privileged in their dynamic and maybe question what effective communication even means for them.
Precisely. It involves looking at how power might be operating subtly through the very way you talk to each other, and whose approach tends to dominate or feel more normal or value within the relationship.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of the potential hurdles. But importantly, the sources don't just focus on the problems. They offer a lot of hope, a lot of practical strategies for making these unions really work, even thrive.
Absolutely, that's a crucial point. The research is clear. These differences, while challenging, are not insurmountable deficits. With awareness, empathy, and effort, they can actually become sources of incredible strength and growth for the couple.
And one of the key pathways seems to be recognizing the complementary strengths each partner brings.
Yes, what Jesse Stribe refers to as cultural complements. Often, partners are drawn to qualities in each other that they feel they lack, and these qualities are frequently shaped by their different class backgrounds. For instance, someone with that middle-class managerial approach might really admire and benefit from their working-class partner's adaptability, their ability to handle crises spontaneously.
And vice versa. The working class partner might value the planning skills.
Exactly. So instead of seeing the planner as rigid or the adaptable one as disorganized, you start to see how these different skill sets actually give the couple a broader toolkit for navigating life.
So the advice is, don't try to change your partner into your own mold.
Pretty much. Actively identify, talk about, and genuinely appreciate these complementary skills and perspectives. View them as equally valid assets that enrich the relationship. Leverage both sets of strengths. Don't demand conformity. Sometimes counseling can even help couples explicitly name and appreciate these hidden assets.
And flowing from that, it sounds like mutual respect, empathy, and a deep commitment to understanding each other's worldviews are just foundational.
Completely non-negotiable, especially in this context. It requires genuine appreciation for who your partner is, including the background that shaped them. Creating that deep sense of emotional safety is key.
What does that look like in practice?
It means things like really practicing active listening and validation, not just hearing the words, but truly trying to understand the experience behind them and validating that their feelings and perspectives are legitimate, even if different from your own.
And empathy is about really trying to see the world through their class-shaped lens.
Yes, trying to grasp why they might react a certain way or hold certain values based on their upbringing. This requires what the sources call cultural curiosity, being genuinely interested, asking questions, wanting to learn about their background, their family norms, their values, approaching it like a respectful student of their culture, without judgment. Gottman's research really emphasizes how crucial that empathetic understanding is.
Building shared goals together also seems vital, and being adaptable.
Absolutely essential for navigating any kind of difference, but especially these. It means having those deep, sometimes difficult conversations about what you both want for your future, your shared vision, and then being adaptable, flexible, willing to compromise, integrate traditions from both sides, find creative solutions when your default approaches clash. Building that relational resilience, the ability to face challenges as a team with optimism and mutual support, rests on this foundation.
Didn't the sources mention a specific model here, the VSA model?
Yes, the vulnerability stress adaptation model. It basically says that marital success isn't about avoiding problems altogether. It's about how effectively couples manage their inherent vulnerabilities, like class differences, and external stressors through positive adaptive processes. Good adaptation is key.
And how does this connect to moving beyond those ingrained class scripts you mentioned earlier?
By consciously and collaboratively creating new shared goals and ways of doing things that aren't just carbon copies of either partner's original script. This process builds a really powerful sense of we-ness, a shared identity that can, in key areas, supersede those individual class legacies. It's about intentionally constructing a shared purpose, a unique vision for your family.
Okay, so communication is key, but it sounds like it needs to be a specific kind of communication for cross-class couples.
It really is. It's more than just generic good communication skills. It's almost like becoming skilled cultural translators for each other. Learning to decode the subtle, often unconscious class-inflected meanings behind words and actions. Basic techniques like active listening, validation using I statements, they're all helpful starting points.
What about other specific techniques? I think nonviolent communication was mentioned.
NVC can be incredibly helpful here, yes, because it focuses on getting beneath the surface positions or complaints to the underlying universal human needs for security, respect, autonomy, connection, understanding. It helps translate what might seem like a class-based preference or anxiety, why are you spending so much or why won't you ever relax, into a shared language of unmet needs and feelings, which is much easier to connect over.
That makes sense. Any others?
Things like Gottman's gentle startup for raising issues or having scheduled relationship check-ins can also create safer spaces for these potentially loaded conversations. But crucially, the sources suggest talking not just about what you're discussing, but also how your class backgrounds might be influencing the communication itself, making those assumptions visible.
This really leads into that idea of forging a third culture as a couple.
Exactly. This is the active, collaborative creation of a unique marital culture. It draws elements from both partners' backgrounds, sure, but it ultimately becomes something new and distinct. Your own shared values, norms, rituals, ways of handling holidays, inside jokes, all of it. It's built through ongoing dialogue, learning about each other's worlds, negotiation, compromise, blending things together.
But didn't you say earlier, quoting Strive, that this class characteristics tend to endure, so this third culture isn't like a finished product you arrive at?
That's a really important clarification, yes. Strive's point, merged lives do not lead to merged ideas, reminds us that this third culture isn't about magically erasing your origins. It's a dynamic, ongoing process. It requires constant negotiation, adaptation, and renegotiation, especially as you face new life stages, having kids, changing careers, retiring, dealing with aging parents. It's more about learning to manage the enduring differences with conscious awareness and intentionality, using that co-created shared culture as your anchor and guide.
Okay, so how do couples apply this to navigating those tricky social situations we talked about, meeting the families, friends from different backgrounds?
Yeah, those events can feel really high stakes, like places where class differences and cultural capital are really on display, maybe even judged. Partners can feel exposed.
So what are the practical strategies?
Open communication and proactive preparation before the event are vital. Talk about who'll be there, potential sticky topics, any anxieties either of you have, maybe even some conversational cues or escape plans. Respecting each other's comfort zones is huge. Don't push your partner to perform or conform in ways that feel deeply inauthentic or stressful. Try to find common ground in conversations. Operating as a team during the event is key. Little signals, checking in, backing each other up, focusing internally on your shared values and the strength of your relationship can provide an anchor against external judgment. And, as mentioned before, setting clear boundaries with external opinions presenting that united front, with the native partner ideally taking the lead.
So it's a whole process, not just surviving the party.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize the value of strategies that span the whole arc. The proactive prep before, the teamwork during, and just as importantly, the debriefing after. Talking afterwards about how it went, how you both felt, what you learned that turns a potentially stressful experience into a shared learning opportunity that actually strengthens the couple's bond and their ability to navigate future events.
It definitely sounds like navigating all these layers takes real effort and awareness. Maybe getting some professional support could be really valuable here.
Absolutely. The sources consistently point to professional support, like couples counseling or therapy, as a really helpful resource for unpacking these unique complexities.
What specific benefits does it offer for cross-class couples?
Well, therapy provides a safe, neutral, structured space to explore these things. A good therapist can help couples unpack their different cultural and class identities and understand how they play out. Crucially, they can help make those often invisible dynamics of class and power visible and discussable in the room. They can help couples navigate those tricky financial conflicts by getting to the underlying emotional meanings and values. And they can help improve that cultural translation and communication we talked about.
So it's kind of like getting a guide who understands the specific terrain you're navigating.
That's a great way to put it. They can help you identify the hidden assumptions, the class-based triggers, the unmet needs that might be fueling conflict. The sources do stress, though, that it's really important for therapists themselves to have awareness of their own class background and potential biases. Many therapists come from middle-class backgrounds, so they need to be careful not to misinterpret class differences as individual pathologies or flaws. The aim is therapy with a class-conscious lens, making class an explicit part of the conversation.
This whole conversation has been incredibly insightful. It really shifts how you might look at differences within any relationship, actually.
It really does. I think the core message that comes through strongly from all these sources is this. Yes, your class origin leaves an enduring imprint. It shapes you in profound ways. But these differences don't have to be deficits or deal breakers. With awareness, effort, mutual respect, they can genuinely become sources of strength and richness in a relationship.
So, recapping the keys to thriving, that mutual respect and empathy, really working to understand each other's class-shaped worlds, seeing differences as potential complementary strengths.
Developing those cultural translation communication skills, co-creating shared goals that move beyond individual scripts, and intentionally forging that unique third culture together.
And remembering that seeking professional support isn't a sign of failure, but a smart, proactive step to get tools and guidance specifically for these unique challenges.
Yes, exactly. Cross-class marriages definitely present unique hurdles, but the research suggests they also offer incredible opportunities for growth, personal growth, relational growth, and building meaningful connections across the divides that often separate us in society.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over after this deep dive. Think about the various relationships in your own life, your partner, friends, family, even colleagues. How much of what you've traditionally attributed purely to someone's individual personality might actually have roots in their class background, their upbringing, the cultural landscape they navigate?
It's a powerful lens to look through. It can really change how you understand interactions.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.